Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, August 13th, 2021. Why the fair tax is collected on goods and services provided by government. As more and more people begin looking at the fair tax to replace the failing federal income tax system, one of the questions people often ask is, why does the fair tax tax government? Now remember that the fair tax was designed to produce the same amount of revenue for the government as the income tax. Now if the government were exempted from the fair tax, the rate on the rest of us would have to be higher. As designed, the government pays 4.14 cents of every 23 cents of fair tax collected. Exempt the government from the fair tax, and the rate would have to be 27.14% in order to maintain the fair tax's revenue neutrality. Now, what many people don't seem to understand is that the government is already being taxed under the income payroll tax system. The fair tax would simply make that more transparent. The following information is derived from a paper prepared by Dr. Karen Walby entitled, Why the Fair Tax is Collected on Goods and Services Provided by Government. Just like the private sector goods and services, the cost of the existing federal tax system is embedded in the cost of providing government services. Government employees are subject to the same income tax withholding and employee payroll taxes as private sector employees, and government employers have to pay the employer share of these taxes. Just like the private sector, governments pay their workers higher wages than they would otherwise have to pay if these taxes didn't exist. Governments also purchase substantial amounts of goods and services from government contractors. A road contractor, for example, must pay corporate income and employer payroll taxes and also has to pay its employees higher wages than it would otherwise have to pay if there were no individual federal income and payroll taxes. Through higher wages paid to government employees and higher payments to contractors, the government pays federal taxes today. Dr. Walby then explains how the fair tax is assessed on governments. The Fair Tax Act of 2021, H.R. 25, requires each governmental unit to pay the fair tax on the total value of compensation paid to all of its employees. H.R. 25 imposes the fair tax on the value of all goods and services purchased by each governmental unit, and government enterprises that operate as quasi-businesses and sell services directly to consumers are treated the same as the private sector. Take the U.S. Post Office and Amtrak, for example. Consumers pay for stamps, express mail, and train tickets directly. These government entities would add the fair tax to the price they charge their customers for their services and remit the fair tax that they collect on a monthly basis, just like the private sector. Because they charge sales tax on what they sell, these types of government enterprises do not pay the fair tax on the wages paid to employees, and, like private sector businesses, they do not have to pay the fair tax on goods and services they purchase from vendors. Now, the definition of wages and salary is all compensation paid for employment service, including cash compensation, employee benefits, disability insurance or wage replacement insurance payments, unemployment compensation insurance, workers' compensation insurance, and the fair market value of any other consideration paid by an employer to an employee in consideration for employment services rendered. In conclusion, if you look at it objectively, you have to admire the genius of the people who created the present federal income tax system. They've derived a system under which the government itself is taxed, but it's done in such a way that it's all but completely hidden. Now, people look at you aghast when you tell them the fair tax will be applied to the government. They think that all that's going to do is increase the cost of government services. They don't see that the cost of government programs and services are already being driven up by the income payroll tax system. Now, the government is a major consumer of goods and services, and people don't realize that the prices the government pays for those goods and services is higher because the prices contain the hidden costs of the income payroll tax system. Consequently, the government is paying income payroll taxes every time it buys something. There's another reason that Dr. Walby points out. If one does not tax government consumption, it would encourage more government activity, thereby crowding out private sector activity. For example, if the government at any level built cars and then gave them to consumers for free, before long all cars would be built by the government. The private sector just could not compete. When the proxy can pass the cost on to others by using the income payroll tax as the source of revenue to cover the cost providing a government service, such activity is hidden from the final consumer. Henry David Thoreau said, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." Now, we're not supposed to see that our personal consumption is limited to just the amount we have left over after paying our income taxes, payroll taxes, and all other local, state, and federal taxes. But more and more of us are starting to see what's really there, and not just what the ruling class and their minions in D.C. want us to see. We can understand how frightening it is to the ruling class and their minions that people are beginning to see just how much these layers of local, state, and federal taxes are adversely affecting their ability to provide for their families. Informed people are the greatest threat to the ruling class and their minions. That's why the ruling class and their minions oppose the FAIRtax so fiercely. Take back control. Help us pass the FAIRtax. The IRS will be gone and we'll pay our taxes when we make purchases. We, not the ruling class and their minions in D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay. If you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, then send them to fairtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.